The rain was a machine, a steady metronomic, tapping against the armored glass of the governor's sanctum. It was artificial, like everything else on Eridu Secundus, and Tiberius Verus found comfort in its predictability. Outside, the great hive cities breathed in the recycled, purified air. Inside his sanctum was a pocket of old-world stillness. The air was heavy with the competing scents of mild incense, a concession to the imperial creed, and the sharp, clean smell of ozone from the data engines that lined one wall, their status lights blinking like a patient constellation. It was midnight. He was, as always, working. Spread before him on the polished wood of his desk was not a flickering data slate, but a sheaf of thick, high-quality vellum. Reports from the agri-sectors. Varus ran a finger along a column of figures, the textured paper a pleasant friction against his skin. Sector Gamma production up 12%, Sector Epsilon 18%. The new irrigation schemes his own design had been a complete success. For the first time in a generation, Eridu Secundus was not just meeting its tithe, it was generating a surplus. A true, documented, verifiable surplus. He allowed himself a small, thin smile. Yields up 15% across the board, he murmured, his voice a dry sound in the quiet room. Perfect. Order. That was the goal. Not faith, not glory, but the simple, beautiful mathematics of a world that worked. A soft chime, a discreet tone from his desk vox, shattered the quiet. Varus frowned, his brief moment of satisfaction evaporating. No one disturbed him at this hour, unless the matter was trivial or dire. He tapped the receiver rune. Speak. The voice that replied was tinny, bleached of all humanity by static and filters. Dear Governor, message encoded, read. Astropathic transmission priority 1. The choir requests your presence. Varus felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. Red. Not the amber of administrative delays or the gray of routine logistics. Red. The color of command, of terror, of demands that were not requests. He stood smoothing the front of his formal administrative robes. The reports on his desk suddenly seemed very small. I am coming. He walked from the office, the sound of the rain fading behind him, replaced by the sterile hum of the gubernatorial spire. He passed servo skulls that dipped in acknowledgement, their red optical lenses sweeping the empty corridors. The walk to the astropathic chamber was always unsettling. It was a journey from the temporal to the spiritual, and Varus had little patience for the latter. The chamber was a cold, dark vault, the air thick with a different kind of incense, cloying and heavy, and the crackle of immense unseen power. The static here was not from a vox. It was the sound of reality being torn just a little to let the messages through. In the center of the room, sunken into the floor, was the astropathic choir, a collection of pale, withered figures attended by robed adepts. Their combined psychic scream was mercifully contained, but the air still tasted like copper. The astropath Prime, a woman whose eyes were bound in strips of sacred vellum, was kneeling holding a silver cylinder. Governor, she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. It comes from the Segmentum Command, from the Adeptus Terra. Varus took the cylinder. It was cold to the touch. He did not bother with the ceremonial platitudes. He twisted the cap, and the hiss of depressurization was loud in the silence. He slid out the scroll. It wasn't paper. It was a single perfect sheet of vellum, so fine it was almost translucent. At the bottom, attached by a crimson ribbon, was the seal, the double-headed aquila rendered in hard, dark red wax, the symbol of ultimate authority. Varus took a small, sharp knife from his belt. The sound of the wax seal breaking the dry, brittle snap was the loudest sound he had ever heard. He unrolled the scroll. The script was flawless, inked by an autoquill centuries old. It was not a long message. It was a single directive. an adjustment to the imperial tithe for Eridu Secundus. His eyes scanned the text, his administrator's mind, parsing the formal language, searching for the key data. He found it. His blood, which had been cool, turned to ice. He read the line again, and a third time, certain his eyes were deceiving him, that the strain and the ozone and the static had finally broken his mind. But the ink was clear. The demand was unmistakable. He looked up from the vellum, his face a mask of iron control, but his mind was reeling. Triple, he said the word, a bare whisper, lost in the psychic static. They cannot be serious. He rolled the vellum back into a tight scroll, his movements precise, mechanical. He did not look at the astropath prime. He turned and walked from the chamber, the silver cylinder gripped so tightly in his hand that the metal began to bite into his palm. He returned to his sanctum, the sound of the artificial rain, a sudden, violent assault. He stood before the great window, looking down at the millions of lights that represented the billions of souls under his protection. His world, his perfect, orderly 15% surplus world. A triple tithe wasn't a demand. It was a death sentence. It meant starvation, riots, the collapse of the very order he had spent his life building. He stared at his own reflection in the glass, a pale, stern man caught between the light of his city and the darkness of his room. "I will appeal," he said, his voice hard. "This is a mistake." The strategium was a world away from his sanctum. Where his office was a place of wood and vellum, the command center was a cavern of cold green light and humming metal. Data streamed down holographic displays, charting the lifeblood of Eridu Secundus, energy distribution, atmospheric integrity, shipping routes. Varus stood at the central plinth, not looking at the glowing runes, his mind still consumed by the parchment in his pocket. He was dictating his appeal to a Vox scribe, his voice sharp and precise. Paragraph 12. The logistical and societal infrastructure of Eridu Secundus, while robust, cannot sustain a 300% increase in output without catastrophic failure. Such a demand suggests a clerical error in the preceding astropathic transmission. We request immediate clarification and revision. Governor, a new voice cut through his dictation. It was Admiral Klyan, head of the Planetary Defense Fleet. Klyan was a man who looked like he was carved from granite, but his mind, Varus feared, was just as inflexible. He was standing by the system integrity console, a frown on his face. "Apologies for the interruption. We have an anomaly." Varus silenced the scribe with a gesture. "Define anomaly." "Admiral." Klyan tapped the console. A section of the holographic map representing the system's outer marker, the Mandeville Point, flashed with a tiny amber rune. Our long-range listening posts. Sectors 4 and 5. They're picking up ghost signals. Faint layered non-imperial codecs. Varus moved to the console, his eyes narrowing. The appeal for a moment was forgotten. He looked at the data. It was just noise, mostly. A hiss of static, but underneath, a rhythm, a pattern. Has it been triangulated? "We're trying," Klyan said, not sounding overly concerned. "It's likely solar flare interference. The posts out there are old governor. The machine spirits are temperamental. It's just noise. The system periphery is always unstable." Varus watched the data stream. The amber rune pulsed. He felt the cold prickle at his neck again, the same feeling he'd had in the astropathic vault. "Noise doesn't move in formation," Admiral Varus said, his voice quiet. Klyan shifted his discomfort, obvious. "Sir, with respect, there is nothing there. A few sensor wraiths. The fleet has its patrol routes. We can't chase every shadow." "You believe I am overreacting," Varus stated. It wasn't a question. Klyan's expression was carefully neutral. "I believe you are under immense pressure, sir. The tithe is a separate matter." Varys turned away from the Admiral, looking back at the map. The city's green data glow, his orderly world seemed to end abruptly at the blackness of the void. And in that blackness, something was tapping at the door. "I am worried about everything, Admiral. That is my function." He turned back to Client, his decision made. "Maintain your standard patrols, but you will divert the Stalwart and the Iron Hand to Sector 4. A sensor calibration sweep. I want them running active augers full spectrum." Client looked like he wanted to argue it was a waste of fuel, a drain on resources they might need for the tithe, but he held his tongue. "As you command." The Admiral saluted his heavy boots, clicking on the metal deck as he left the Strategium. Varys watched him go, his new anxiety a cold, hard knot in his gut. He was now fighting two wars, one against the crushing illogical bureaucracy of his own Imperium, and another against a shadow that his own military leadership refused to see. He returned to the central plinth, the Vox scribe still waiting patiently, its optical lens glowing a dull red. "Where was I?" he asked, not really caring. The words of his appeal, which had seemed so righteous and clear, now felt hollow. He was pleading for reason from an entity that had just demanded the impossible, all while a potential physical threat gathered at his borders. He finished the dictation, his voice flat. "Send it. Priority 1. Use the red cipher for the response." The scribe nodded and wheeled away. Varys remained alone in the Strategium, the cold green light of his perfect world washing over him. He had sent his plea into the void. Now he would see what kind of monster replied first. 1 week, 7 days of silence from Terra, and 7 days of escalating noise from the void. The waiting had flayed Tiberius Varys' nerves raw. He now lived in the Strategium, sleeping on a cot, his robes smelling of stale air and ozone. The green holographic map was his entire world. The amber runes were no longer ghosts. They were solid crimson icons moving with predatory purpose. Admiral Client was no longer skeptical. He was grim, his reports clipped, and professional, which Varys found far more terrifying than any panic. The noise had a name now. Orc. A small fleet, a Wa fragment, but large enough to shatter his depleted PDF. He was in the astropathic antechamber, not the vault itself. The air here was somehow worse, a sterile, charged quiet, where the ever-present static of the choir felt like fine needles brushed against his skin. It was a place designed for waiting, and thus a place of subtle torture. He hadn't come for a new message. He had come for the answer. He had sent his appeal, his logical, precise, undeniable appeal. He had proven with mathematics that the demand was impossible. He had expected a correction, an apology from some functionary on distant Terra. He still somewhere deep in his heart believed in the system. The door to the inner vault hissed open. The astropath Prime emerged, leaning heavily on her staff. She looked more than withered. She looked broken. The vellum strips across her eyes seemed tighter, the skin around them pale and clammy. She held no silver cylinder. She simply stood before him, trembling. "Lord Governor," she whispered, her voice a reedy gasp. "The response, it has come." Just then, a secondary door opened, and one of his own aides, a young man from the administratum, hurried in, his face pale. He held a data slate. "Governor." From the stalwart. "Admiral Client." He says it is confirmed. 2 answers arriving at the same instant. The spiritual and the temporal, a pincer movement to crush him. Varys held up a hand to his aide, his eyes fixed on the astropath. "The message from Terra." "Deliver it." "The astropath." Prime flinched. "There is no scroll, my lord. The choir. We could not form it." "The message. It was just a..." She struggled, her unseen eyes blinking rapidly beneath the vellum. A shout. A single conceptual wave of pure confirmation. What did it say? Varys demanded, his patience gone. "Pay the tithe," she whimpered, quoting the raw psychic scream. No delay. No recourse. Varys felt the blood drain from his face. No revision. No negotiation. Not even the courtesy of a full sentence. Just a command like one would give to a disobedient animal. The system had not made a mistake. The system simply didn't care. His appeal had not been denied. It had been ignored. The needles of static in the room seemed to burrow into his brain. He took the data slate from his aide's trembling hand. He didn't need to read it. He knew. But he did anyway. The runes were stark. Positive Xenos signature. Orc cruiser class, estimated 3 capital ships, multiple escorts. Vector Eridu Secundus. Intercept 72 hours. He was trapped. Utterly. He could not fight the orcs and pay the tithe. He could not strip his world of every soldier, every ship, every bolt round, to send to an uncaring Imperium while his people were being slaughtered. He could not hide from the tithe, or the orcs would find him. He could not hide from the orcs, or the Imperium would declare him traitor. He looked at the astropath Prime, who was weeping silently. The entire thing, he asked, his voice, now dangerously calm. All the panic burned away, leaving something cold and hard. That was the entire message. It just repeats the demand, Lord Governor, she whispered. The entire thing. No explanation. Varys nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. The ice in his veins was now steel. So be it. He turned to his aide. You will speak of this to no one. Sir, the tithe will be met. Varys said, the lie tasting like ash, and the planet will be defended. Leave me. The aide and the astropath fled. Varys walked out of the chamber, the static hissing at his back. He returned to his sanctum, the artificial rain still tapping a sound he now hated. He stood before his desk and looked up at the golden aquila on the wall. The symbol of his faith, his purpose, his masters. For the first in his life, he didn't see a proud eagle. He saw a carrion bird, a vulture, circling his dying world, waiting to feast. We are on our own. The storm broke. This was no artificial rain. It was a real violent tempest, a symptom of the roiling warp that had pushed the orc fleet into his system. The wind screamed against the armored glass of the sanctum, a physical echo of the psychic scream from Terra. Varys sat at his desk, staring not at reports, but at the dual threats glowing on his master console, the crimson icons of the orcs and the flashing red rune of his overdue tithe. He was paralyzed. There was no mathematical solution. There was no appeal. There was only ruin, a soft chime from his internal vox. Governor, his aide's voice was strained, a civilian vessel, a journeyman class trader, the stellar cartographer. It just translated in-system broadcasting a distress signal. Varys looked up, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by irritation. A civilian ship. Now tell them to reroute. We are under imminent Xenos attack. Sir. They can't. They claim severe damage from an emergency translation. They were diverted by the same storm that brought the orcs. They are requesting emergency landing rights. Varys scrubbed his face with his hands. A refugee ship. More mouths to feed, more lives to protect, when he couldn't even protect his own. Fine, he snapped. Grant them port access. Quarantine protocols. I don't have time for this. He returned to his console, but his focus was broken. An hour later, his aide chimed again. Governor. The captain of the stellar cartographer sends his profound thanks. He also had a passenger, a man of some importance. He insists on seeing you. He says he can help. Varys was about to refuse to rage at the sheer audacity, but a cold curiosity stopped him. Help what passenger? He presents credentials as an acolyte. attached to the Administratum High Command. He says his name is Malachi. Malachi was not what he expected. He was not a stern official or a robed zealot. He was a small, neat man dressed in plain, dark robes that seemed to absorb the light in the room. He moved with an unsettling smoothness, his feet making no sound on the stone floor. And he carried a scent, a strange, dry smell, like ancient vellum left too long near a source of high energy, like old paper and ozone. He entered the sanctum, gave a shallow, polite bow, and his eyes met Varys's. They were dark, unblinking. He never seemed to blink enough. Governor Varys Malachi's voice was soft, reasonable. A terrible confluence of events you face. The hammer of the Xenos and the anvil of the tithe. Varys remained standing behind his desk, a barrier of authority. Your credentials seem vague, acolyte Malachi, and your arrival is convenient. Malachi smiled a brief, bloodless gesture. The galaxy is a place of terrible coincidences, Governor. I was en route to Segmentum Command when our ship was thrown off course. Perhaps it was the Emperor's will that I arrive here at this moment. To assist. Assist, how Varys sneered the word, tasting bitter. Will you write another appeal for me? Will you petition the orcs to leave? No, Malachi said, stepping closer to the desk, his gaze dropping to the glowing console. I am a pragmatist, and I serve the same master you do, the Imperium. And the Imperium doesn't care how, Governor. It only cares that. Varys felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in days. Not hope, exactly, but a dark, desperate curiosity. Our resources are stretched to the breaking point, Varys said, his voice low. We face the Xenos in orbit. I cannot meet the tithe. I cannot. Malachi's gaze slid to the window to the hive city below. But you have resources you haven't even begun to tap, he whispered. Untouched. Unlisted. Deep below this very hive. In a place your own records have sealed. Malachi turned his unblinking stare back to Varys. Manufactory 47. A chill went down Varys's spine. Manufactory 47 was forbidden, sealed by the Adeptus Mechanicus generations ago. It was a black mark in the archives, a place of tech heresy from the Dark Age. That facility is proscribed, Varys said, his voice a harsh whisper. The tech priests have forbidden its activation. The tech priests, Malachi said, his voice laced with a faint, amused disdain, are not facing your dilemma. They are not the ones who must choose between heresy and annihilation. Order must be maintained, Governor. By any means. Varys looked at the orc fleet on his console. He looked at the flashing red demand from Terra. He was a man drowning, and this was a hand reaching out of the darkness. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was a betrayal of his principles. But his principles were failing. Show me, Varys said. Manufactory 47 was not just a factory. It was a tomb. It lay in the lowest, darkest foundations of the hive, in the unlit substrata, where the only sound was the drip of ancient condensation and the distant seismic groan of the city's geothermal vents. The air was cold, a dead metallic cold that clung to the lungs. It was thick with the dust of millennia. Varys wore a simple breathing mask, but the air still tasted of rust and forgotten time. Malachi, of course, wore nothing and seemed untroubled. They were accompanied by a single terrified engine seer, a low-level tech priest Varys had requisitioned bypassing the senior clergy. The engine seer Magos Vorl was clutching his data slate so hard his servo-enhanced knuckles were white. Governor, this is unwise. Vorl stammered, his synthesized voice crackling with static and fear. The seals on this sector are crimson adamant. They were placed by the Fabricator General of Mars himself. The seals are noted, Magos. Varus said, his voice muffled by the mask. Your job is to open them, not to question why. Malachi glided silently beside them, his dark eyes taking in everything. The trio stood before a vast bulkhead door, large enough to admit a Titan. It was covered in Mechanicus purity seals, now cracked and gray with age. Vorl began to chant the litanies of unbinding his mechadendrites, plugging into ancient ports, his voice shaking. With a sound like a mountain range collapsing, the door ground open. Dust rained from the ceiling. The air that billowed out was not just cold, it was wrong. It felt like the air in the astropathic vault, thick with ozone and a dry electric tension. Inside the manufactory was a cathedral of forbidden technology. It was not a place of pistons and forges. The central chamber was dominated by a single immense machine. It was a sphere of dark, non-reflective metal suspended in a web of crystalline conductors and brass conduits. It was utterly silent. By the Omnissiah's breath, Vorl whispered, genuine awe warring with his terror. It's a psi conduit, a harmonic amplifier from the Dark Age, Archaeotech. Malachi murmured, stepping forward. He ran a hand along one of the conduits, his touch almost fond. The fools who built this city thought it was just a power source. It is so much more. Varus approached the machine, drawn by a dreadful fascination. It was beautiful in a terrible alien way. What does it do? It amplifies, Malachi said simply. It takes a small, quiet signal and makes it a roar. The tech priests feared it because it amplifies the mind governor. It amplifies will, intent, emotion. Varus turned on him. I am not a psyker. My people are not. They don't need to be. Malachi explained, his tone that of a patient teacher. Think of your workers laboring in the manufactories above. They are tired. They are inefficient. Their wills are weak. He gestured to the sphere. This machine can be focused, tuned, linked to the central power grid. It can send out a signal, a suggestion, on a frequency no one can consciously hear. A suggestion of diligence, of purpose. You want to use this thing to control their minds. Varus said the words tasting like poison. I want to save your planet, Malachi corrected him, his voice hardening. I want to make your workers efficient. You need to meet the tithe. Do you not imagine? Every worker in every factory suddenly feeling a surge of loyalty, a desire to work harder, a focus they have never known. Your production would not just increase, it would explode. The engine seer Vorl had backed away, his bionics clicking in agitation. Heresy. This is techno-sorcery. This is the sin of the Silica Animus, to impose a false will upon the faithful. Governor, we must leave. We must purge this place. Varus looked at Vorl. Then he looked at Malachi. Then he looked at the dark, silent sphere. He thought of the orc ships. He thought of the cold, dismissive command from Terra. He thought of the billions of lives in the hive above, oblivious to the knife edge they stood upon. This was a sin. This was heresy. He knew it. But the alternative was annihilation. His ideals were a luxury he could no longer afford. He had been sent to this world to ensure order. This machine was a tool of order. A terrible, forbidden tool, but a tool nonetheless. His first compromise. The first shortcut. He looked at the engine seer. Magos Vorl. You will not purge this place. You will activate it. Vorl's optical lens widened in shock. Governor, I cannot. You will, Varus said, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. Or I will have Admiral Klein's PDF stormtroopers find a tech priest who can. And you will be registered as a casualty of this unstable sector. The Magos stared at him, the man's terror of the machine now overshadowed by his terror of the governor. He trembled, and then, with a broken sob, He turned to the control panel. This is a damnable act, Governor. Varys turned his back on him, facing the dark sphere. He didn't need to see the sin being committed. Activate it, he ordered, his voice cold. Lowest possible setting. Just enough to meet the demand. He heard the snap hiss of ancient relays. He heard the whir of capacitors charging for the first time in 10,000 years. And then, a sound. Not a loud sound. A low, deep thrum. A single pure note that vibrated in his bones. The dark sphere began to glow a faint, pale blue light. Varys left as the light brightened, not daring to look back at the machine or the broken priest. He walked out of the tomb, Malachi following silently in his shadow, the growing hum of Manufactory 47 chasing them up into the dark. The results were not just a success, they were a miracle. Or a monstrosity. Varys was no longer sure which. The data began to flow into his sanctum within 12 hours of the machine's activation. The low thrumming hum from Manufactory 47 had become the new heartbeat of the hive, a subsonic pulse that Varys could feel even in his spire. He told himself it was just the vibration of industry. He lied. The production readouts were insane. Quotas that had been impossible were met, then doubled, then tripled. Sector Gamma's manufactories, the ones closest to the 47 conduit, reported a 400% increase in output. The tithe, the impossible world-breaking tithe, was suddenly terrifyingly achievable. He should have felt relief, victory. Instead, he felt a cold dread that settled in his stomach, far heavier than the fear of the orcs. He had to see. He couldn't just trust the data slates. He needed to see the efficiency Malachi had promised. He bypassed his usual entourage, taking only a single armored ground car into the industrial hab zones of Gamma. The change was immediate. The streets, usually teeming with off-shift workers, were quiet. The air was thick with a different kind of smog, a heavy metallic tang from factories running without pause. There was no shift change siren. There was only the endless rhythmic thump, thump, thump from the city's depths. He visited one of the worker barracks, a grim concrete blockhouse. He had been here before on morale-boosting tours. It had always been loud, smelling of cheap food and humanity. Now it was silent, save for a low collective murmur. The off-shift workers were not resting. They were in their bunks, but they were not sleeping. They were lying, eyes half open, staring at the soot-stained ceilings. Their bodies were exhausted, but their minds, their hands, they still twitched, miming the actions of their factory jobs. Assembling, sorting, welding. Assembling, sorting, welding. Varys approached a foreman. He recognized a man named Heth. Foreman Heth. Your shift. Why are they not resting? The foreman turned to him, his eyes unfocused, bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Rest Sir Heath's voice was a dry croak. No time. The work must be done. The work is everything. He seemed to snap to attention, recognizing his governor. Apologies, Lord Governor. The men, they are diligent. They don't stop. Not even to eat unless we force them. Varys looked at the workers. They were gaunt, their skin pale, their faces streaked with soot. They are dedicated, Varys said the word, feeling wrong. They are productive. Yes, sir, Heth said, a strange, nervous energy in him. Productive. But, sir, the dreams. Varys' attention sharpened. Dreams. They complain about the dreams, the foreman whispered, leaning closer. Even when they are awake. They say the machine sings to them. It's the hum, sir, the one from below. It gives them the work. He paused, swallowing. And they talk about an eye, sir. A big, quiet eye watching them from the soot, telling them, more. Always. More. Varys felt his blood run cold. He took a step back from the foreman from the smell of unwashed bodies and metal and a creeping collective madness. He saw one worker, a young woman tracing a pattern on the wall with a soot-stained finger. A spiral coiling inwards. "See that they are fed," Varys set his voice a harsh command. "Their productivity is all that matters. This is a temporary measure, foreman. To save us all." He turned and walked out of the barracks, the low rhythmic murmuring of the workers following him. He didn't look at the woman tracing the spiral. He didn't look at any of them. They were no longer people. They were numbers. They were the 400%. They were the price of his appeal, the cost of his shortcut. They were the tithe. He returned to his spire to find Malachi waiting in the sanctum, standing by the window, looking down at the hive. The advisor smiled that same thin, bloodless smile. Impressive, are they not, Governor, your people? So full of potential. Varys went to his desk, avoiding the man's gaze. He looked at the glowing green projection of the tithe transports, now filling rapidly. "They are efficient," Varys said, his voice hard, trying to convince himself. "The tithe will be met." See, Malachi's voice was a soft, approving hiss in the quiet room. Order. Maintained. By any means necessary. Varys poured a glass of amasec, his hand shaking slightly. The liquid did nothing to warm the ice in his gut. The tithe was met. The massive, lightless transports had clawed their way out of gravity's well, their holds filled with the impossible, crushing surplus. The red rune demanding payment vanished from Varys's console. He felt no relief. He had won a reprieve from one executioner, only to be handed to another. The strategium was no longer a place of cold calculation. It was a sanctuary of controlled panic. The green data streams had turned to a cascading flood of crimson. The orc fleet had arrived. The attack was brutal and fast, lacking any of the strategy Varys himself would have employed. It was a hammer blow of scrap metal and crude energy. The holographic tank in the center of the room was a storm of failing blue icons, his PDF being swarmed by jagged red ones, the orcs. Orbital platform, Gamma is gone. A tech adept shouted, his voice cracking. The Iron Hand reports catastrophic hull breaches. They're gone, sir. Varys gripped the rail of the command plinth, his knuckles white. He watched the icons of his ships, the ships he had starved of fuel and munitions, to pay the tithe wink out of existence one by one. Then the main vox crackled, and Admiral Clion's voice filled the room, layered with the thunder of explosions and the shriek of tearing metal. "They're too many. They've breached the command deck. We need..." "Arr!" The transmission dissolved into a wet, choking sound, then a final deafening blast of static. The blue icon for the flagship stalwart fractured and disappeared. A profound, terrible silence settled over the strategium, broken only by the quiet weeping of a junior officer. Varys felt his stomach clench. The static, it was the sound of his failure. The orcs had broken the navy. The planetary invasion would begin in hours. His soldiers were weak. They lacked purpose. The voice was quiet, calm, and utterly out of place. Malachi was standing in the archway, as if he had been summoned by the disaster. He walked onto the command deck, his unblinking eyes fixed on the red tide in the holotank. "Governor, your world is about to die. Get out." Varys snarled, his grief twisting into a sudden white-hot rage. "This is your fault. The tithe, I stripped the fleet for your efficiency, and the tithe was paid," Malachi said, smoothly unmoved. "Terra is satisfied. Now we must satisfy the second requirement, survival. The orcs are coming, and your ground forces are terrified. They heard their admiral die. They will break. They are only human. They are soldiers of the Imperium. They are flesh and fear." Malachi countered, stepping closer. "But you have a tool. You have a means to inspire them. to focus their will just as you focused the workers. Varys recoiled as if struck. You want to use the machine on the army, on the PDF. Why not? Malachi's question was one of genuine curiosity. Their duty is to fight and die. The amplifier will simply make them more efficient. It will burn away their fear, their doubt, their humanity, and leave only the will to obey, the will to win. This is heresy. Varys whispered the words, sounding weak and meaningless. He had already said that. It's a psi conduit, not a battle hymn. What will it do to them? Malachi smiled. It will make them effective. What is your alternative, Governor? Do you wish to die on the barricades? Do you wish to be torn apart by greenskins? So is dying to orcs. It is the ultimate inefficiency. He gestured to the holotank, where the first landers were already detaching burning trails toward the planet. You are out of time. You have saved your planet's soul for the Imperium. Now, you must save its body. Varys looked at the red icons. He heard the static shriek of Client's death in his mind. He had no choice. He had given up his choices the moment he opened the door to Manufactory 47. He was a man drowning, and the hand offered to him was this. Do it, Varys said the words, tasting like ash. The command was a death sentence. Magos Vorl, he said to the pale, trembling tech priest at the comms station. Link the Manufactory 47 conduit to the Planetary Defense VoxNet. All barracks, all channels, full power. The Magos looked at him, his optic lens whirring in horror. Governor. Now, Varys roared. As the Magos frantically entered the command codes, Varys felt it rather than heard it. The low thump-thump of the machine, the heartbeat of the hive changed. It accelerated the rhythm, shifting from a dull thrum of labor to a pounding, aggressive, hungry roar. In barracks across Eridu Secundus, the icons of the Aquila on the walls seemed to flicker and dim as a new, terrible energy flooded the airwaves. The orcs came in a tide of green flesh and red metal, screaming their primal, joyous war cry. Kuh! The sound was a physical weight rolling over the blasted suburbs of Hive Primus. They poured from their crude landers, firing wildly, expecting a rout, expecting the delicious, terrified screams of a broken populace. They did not get them. What they met was silence. Varys watched from the main observation window of the Strategium, which had been lowered into its bunker configuration, the armored glass replaced with a high-definition holofeed. The view was of the main plaza, Sector Tenebra. The orcs charged, and the Eridu Secundus PDF advanced to meet them. They did not run. They marched. They moved in perfect, terrible synchronicity, their las rifles held at the exact same angle. There were no battle cries, no shouts of "For the Emperor." There was only the rhythmic, unified thud of thousands of boots on the ferrocrete. The orcs, for a fraction of a second, seemed to hesitate, their primal charge faltering in the face of this unnatural discipline. Then, the two lines met. The battle was not a battle. It was an execution. The PDF did not duck. They did not take cover. They simply stood, line-fired, took a precise step forward and fired again. Las beams, normally sporadic in a firefight, became a single, pulsing wave of energy. They cut down orcs by the score, but the orcs were many. The greenskins slammed into the PDF line, crude choppas swinging. This was where the PDF should have broken, where fear and biology should have taken over. Instead, Varys watched with a sickening, cold horror. A soldier, a woman from the 12th Regiment, was slashed across the chest by an orc. She did not scream. She did not fall. She simply continued to fire her last rifle into the orc's face, emptying the power pack until her own body, empty of life, collapsed. And the man behind her stepped into her place without a change in expression, his rifle already firing. The orcs, creatures of pure, violent emotion, were confused. Their rage was met not with fear, which they fed on, but with a cold, mechanical void. They bellowed, and the PDF answered with silent, disciplined fire. Casualties on the PDF side were horrific. Varus saw men and women march calmly into the mouths of orc cannons, their only purpose to get one last shot off. They absorbed losses that would have shattered an Imperial Guard legion, yet they didn't rout. They didn't retreat. They just advanced. And the orcs began to falter. This wasn't a fight. It was like trying to punch a machine that was slowly, calmly, and efficiently grinding them into paste. The rout began an hour later. The great orc war boss, having seen his personal guard annihilated by a unit that simply marched into his gunfire to get in range, let out a roar of frustration and confusion. He and the survivors scrambled back toward their landers, but the PDF did not let them. They did not cheer their victory. They did not raise a flag. They simply advanced their bootsteps, a funereal drum, and continued the harvest. They shot the orcs in the back as they ran. The Xenos were for the first time in their brutish existence truly afraid. They were being beaten by something they could not understand. The victory feed was patched into the strategium. A sergeant, his face caked in soot, and orc blood, his helmet gone, stood at perfect attention. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, but his voice was a perfect monotone, bleached of all feeling. "Sector Tenebra is clear," the voice said tinny over the vox. "Xenos presence eliminated. Casualties 70%. Objective complete. Awaiting new orders." Varus stared at the sergeant's empty face. He had won. He had saved his planet. He looked at Malachi, who was standing in the shadows of the room, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. "You." Varus's voice was a choked whisper. "What have you done to them?" Malachi stepped into the light. "I did what you asked, Governor." His voice was soft but reasonable. "I made them effective." Varus looked back at the screen. The surviving soldiers in the plaza were not celebrating. They were not tending to their wounded. They were standing in perfect formation in the ruin, their last rifles pointed at the sky, waiting for the next command. The smoke had cleared over Hive Primus, but the smell of ozone and burnt flesh lingered. The streets were clean. Too clean. The new efficient PDF had cleared the rubble and Xenos corpses with the same mechanical silent purpose with which they had fought. Eridu Secundus had returned to a semblance of normality. The manufactories thrummed their output now steady at the new impossible rate. The tithe transports were gone. The orc fleet was scrap. Varus from his sanctum should have felt the deep satisfaction of a governor who had achieved the impossible. He had saved his world. Instead, he just felt hollow. He was managing the logistics of a victory he couldn't stand to look at. The alert came from the spaceport, not the strategium. It wasn't a military vessel. It was a single, sleek, black ship that slid into orbit with an arrogance that defied all traffic control. It broadcast one signal, one symbol, and the entire port shut down. The symbol was a stark, three-barred eye. Varus felt the blood drain from his face, the seal of the Inquisition. It wasn't a massive battleship, but it didn't need to be. Its authority was absolute. His momentary relief from the orc victory evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp dread that was far more potent. This was not a problem he could solve with a machine. His vox chimed. "Governor." His aide's voice was a strained, terrified whisper. "A vessel the sword of reason. It carries an agent of the most holy Ordos. An Inquisitor Charis. He is disembarking. He requests, no demands your presence at the port. Immediately." Varus straightened his robes, his hands perfectly steady. The hollowness inside him was now a useful void, a place where fear would normally be. He was no longer fighting for his planet. He was fighting for his life. The spaceport was silent. The normal chaos of workers and pilgrims was gone, replaced by a cordon of stormtroopers in the black and red carapace of the Inquisition. They were statues. In the center of the landing bay stood a man. He was young, which was somehow more terrifying. Inquisitor Karras. He was thin with a severe face, and he wore the simple black robes of his office, unadorned, save for a silver inquisitorial rosette pinned to his collar. He was reading a data slate as Varys approached his heavy gubernatorial boots, echoing in the cavernous space. Karras looked up as Varys stopped a respectful 10 paces away. His eyes were the color of cold steel. "Governor Tiberius Varys Karras said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence, sharp as a scalpel. "A remarkable victory you've had here. Almost too remarkable." Varys inclined his head, his face a mask of polite duty. "Inquisitor, we were fortunate. And our soldiers, brave." Brave, Karras repeated the word, sounding like a question. He took a step closer, and Varys fought the instinct to recoil. "I have read the reports. A 400% increase in production. An Orc WH fragment annihilated by a PDF force that took 70% casualties and did not break. That is not bravery, Governor. That is unnatural." Varys kept his expression neutral. "We were desperate, Inquisitor. Desperation breeds fortitude." Karras smiled a thin, humorless gesture. "Fortitude," he said. "Yes. I also received a fragmented report from a Magos Vorl of your local Mechanicus priesthood." He was deeply distressed. He spoke of proscribed technology. He spoke of Manufactory 47. The name hit Varys like a physical blow. Karras knew. Bravery. Governor Karras continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "does not explain Manufactory 47 exceeding its quotas by 400% while utilizing a Dark Age CI conduit. That is not fortitude. That is heresy." Varys' heart hammered against his ribs, but his face remained a mask. "I don't know what you mean, Inquisitor. Our records, your records are a lie." Karras snapped, his sudden anger a flash of heat. "The astropathic choir of this world has gone quiet. Not silent, but stifled, as if a great weight is pressing on their minds. The machine, Governor. You turned it on." Karras held up his data slate. "I am here to place this world under interdict. You are to be taken into custody for questioning. My stormtroopers will secure Manufactory 47. Varys looked at the stormtroopers. He looked at Karras. His mask of control was perfect. "Of course, Inquisitor. I will comply fully." He turned as if to lead the way, and in the shadows of the landing bay just behind a stack of cargo containers, he saw him. Malachi. He was just standing there, watching, his dark eyes unblinking. He hadn't been there a second ago. Malachi looked at Varys, then at Karras, and gave a very slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Varys understood. Karras could not be allowed to secure the machine. He could not be allowed to send his report. Varys turned back to the Inquisitor, his mind racing. He had to stall. He had to get him back to the spire. "Will you at least see my office, Inquisitor, so I may hand over the seals of governance in an orderly fashion?" Karras studied him, then nodded. "Very well. Order above all." Inquisitor Karras was quartered in Guest Spire 7, a luxurious apartment reserved for high-ranking dignitaries. He was not resting. He was surrounded by a portable data cogitator, his stormtroopers standing guard outside the door, his mind focused on composing his final report. He was a man who believed in the system, and Varys had so far been perfectly compliant. The governor was in his own spire, offering full access to the archives. Karras suspected a trap, but he could not see its shape. The quiet of the spire was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the air recyclers. Varus, in his own sanctum, sat in the dark. The only light came from the green glow of his console. Malachi was there, a presence in the corner, more a patch of deeper shadow than a man. He is fast. Governor Malachi's voice was a soft intrusion. He has already quarantined Magos Vorl. He has requested an astropathic red channel for his report. He believes you are cooperating while he cuts off your arms and legs. He is efficient, but not as efficient as he should be. Varus said nothing. He was holding a small object in his hand, something he hadn't touched in years. It was a small carved wooden bird, smooth with age, a gift from his grandfather. It was a symbol of old Eridu before the hives, a relic of a past he had sworn to protect. He ran his thumb over the wood. He felt nothing. No warmth, no nostalgia. It was just an object. He must be stopped. Governor Malachi stated, not as a suggestion, but as a simple fact, like noting the time. His report will bring a fleet. Not a small one. An Inquisition fleet. They will not care about your tithe. They will not care about the orcs. They will burn this world from pole to pole to cleanse your heresy. Is that order? Varus looked at the wooden bird. He thought of the fire raining from the sky, the final ultimate disorder. He had come this far. He had sacrificed his workers. He had sacrificed his soldiers. What was one more? What was the life of one man, even an inquisitor, measured against the survival of a planet? The calculation was cold, and it was simple. He had already crossed the line. This was just tidying up. He set the bird down on his desk. It rolled onto its side. He opened a secure Vox channel, not to the PDF command, not to the Stratageum. He routed it directly to the barracks of the 12th Regiment, the silent, victorious soldiers from the plaza. He knew the sergeant would be awake. They were always awake. Sergeant Varus said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The guest in Spire 7. The asset. He is a threat to the stability of Eridu Secundus. He and his guard. He paused, choosing his word. Secure him. The line was silent for a single charged second. Then the monotone voice replied, Understood. Governor. Varus closed the channel. He did not move. He did not pace. He simply sat at his desk, staring at the wooden bird, and waited. Malachi was silent. The only sound in the room was the steady, artificial tap, tap, tap of the rain against the glass. Varus counted the taps. He waited for alarms. He waited for the sound of las fire, of shouting, of the armored boots of stormtroopers. Nothing. The silence from Spire 7 was as absolute as the silence in his own office. It was a suffocating, complete void. 30 minutes passed. An eternity. The Vox chimed a single soft click. Varus activated it. Governor. It was the same, dead, monotone voice. The asset has been secured. All traces are gone. Varus felt his lungs empty, though he hadn't realized he was holding his breath. The stormtroopers, he asked, his voice a dry rasp, also secured. A pause. They were inefficient. Varus looked at the wooden bird. He had done it. He had murdered an inquisitor of the most holy Ordos. He had committed the one unpardonable sin. He felt no horror. He felt no guilt. He felt nothing. Just a vast, cold, empty finality. The problem was solved. Malachi stepped out of the shadows, his face illuminated by the green console light. He was smiling. See, Governor, order. It has been maintained. With the Inquisitor gone, a strange, dead calm had settled on the spire. Varus felt complete. He had solved all the problems. The tithe was paid. The orcs were defeated, and the investigation was concluded. He had achieved total order. Yet Malachi was not satisfied. There is one last piece of administration, Governor, he'd said, his voice soft. A final calibration. You should see the true source of your success." He led Varys not to the sphere's control room, but past it to a small hidden elevator Varys had never known existed. They descended. They went down far below the foundation of the hive into the ancient, unmapped rock. The air grew cold, but it was no longer the dead chill of a tomb. It was alive. The elevator opened into a vast natural cavern that had been adapted, its walls sheened with a sickly damp luminescence. The sound was the first thing Varys noticed. The thump-thump of the machine was gone. In its place was a sound he'd only heard in the astropathic vault, amplified 1,000,000 times a whisper. A sibilant, overlapping chorus of thousands of voices, speaking in a language that slid beneath his thoughts. And the machine, the great sphere Varys had seen, was just the tip. It was the bait on a hook that plunged deep into the earth. Here at the root, it was no longer metal and crystal. It was a pulsating mass of energy and something else. It looked like a tear, in reality a wound, and the pale blue light he'd seen above was down here, a vile, shifting, diseased purple. "What is this?" Varys asked, but the question lacked the authority it once had. He was no longer a governor demanding answers. He was a visitor. "It is the engine governor Malachi," said his voice, full of a reverence Varys had never heard. "The device above, it only focuses the will. This is the will." Varys stared into the shifting purple light. He could see things moving within it. Impossible geometries, a hint of a great unblinking eye that saw him and dismissed him instantly. The whispers grew louder, coalescing around a single repeated idea change, just as planned, all cogs in the great machine. "You—" Varys turned to Malachi, a final cold dread dawning. "You are not from the Administratum. You— What are you?" Malachi smiled, and for the first time it was a genuine broad smile. He spread his arms as if to embrace the whispering chaos. "I am the bringer of truth," he said, his voice joining the chorus. "I am a simple agent of change. You wanted to save your world, Tiberius. And you have. I saved it for the Imperium." Varys shouted, his voice a raw, desperate thing, the last spark of his old self. Malachi laughed. It was a terrible sound, dry and thin like hissing paper. "The Imperium, the orcs. They are just cogs. Clumsy, inefficient, predictable cogs in a game you never even knew you were playing." He gestured to the purple wound. "My masters sowed this seed 10,000 years ago, waiting for a man exactly like you. A man of order, a man of hubris, a man arrogant enough to believe he could control the uncontrollable, all in the name of efficiency." Varys stumbled back, his entire world, his pride, his every decision collapsing into a black hole of realization. He hadn't been a shepherd. He hadn't even been a butcher. He had been a pawn. Eridu Secundus no longer serves the corpse god on Terra. Malachi hissed, his eyes glowing with a faint purple reflection. It now serves a far more effective master, and it is as you wished, perfectly in order. Varys's futile rage died, replaced by a vast, crushing emptiness. He was broken. He hadn't saved his planet. He had damned it. Malachi stepped forward, his expression once again calm, pastoral. He placed a friendly, proprietary hand on Varys's shoulder. "And you will continue to rule, our governor, 1 year later." The governor's sanctum was immaculate. The data engines hummed in perfect, patient synchronicity. The air was clean, carrying the precise measure of incense required by protocol, but it could not mask the faint, permanent undercurrent of ozone. The artificial rain tapped against the armored glass, a steady, predictable rhythm. On the polished expanse of the desk, documents were arranged in perfect, severe stacks. At the far edge of the desk, covered in a fine, undisturbed layer of dust, sat a small wooden bird. Tiberius Varys sat in his high-backed chair, signing them. His movements were economical, his hand steady. A servo skull would glide in, present a vellum he would sign it, and the skull would glide away. Eridu Secundus was a miracle, the most efficient, productive, and orderly planet in the entire sector. The Imperial tithe was paid not just on time, but in advance. There was no crime. There was no unrest. There was no deviancy. There was only the work. In the hive cities, the people moved with the same silent mechanical purpose as his soldiers, as his factory workers. They were all cogs in the great efficient machine. Varus had everything he had ever wanted. The perfect mathematical order he had dreamed of. The chaos of human emotion, of fear, of doubt, had been scrubbed clean. He looked down at the document before him, a report on agricultural yields. They were up 15%. Perfect. He felt nothing. No pride, no satisfaction. He felt no horror. He felt no regret. He was a man who had hollowed himself out, and the void had been filled by the machine. He was the perfect administrator, a monster of pure function. The vox chimed, a soft, precise tone. "Hourly production report, Lord Governor," a voice said. It was his aide, but it was not the strained human voice of the man he remembered. It was a flat, dead monotone, the same voice as the sergeant who had secured Chorus. Yields are stable. Efficiency at 101%. Varus leaned forward, his own voice a dry whisper, like the rustle of vellum, almost mechanical. "Acknowledged. Increase efficiency. Yes, Lord Governor," the vox replied and clicked off. From the city below, so faint it was almost imperceptible, came the sound that had become the true pulse of the planet. Thump, 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 thump. The eternal distant heartbeat of manufactory. Fusabavan, the engine he had fed with his people, his soldiers, his soul. He picked up his stylus to sign the next document. The movement was smooth, practiced, inhuman. Varus paused, and for a moment he looked up, his gaze falling on his own reflection in the dark armored glass. He stared, and in the reflection the eyes of the new governor flickered just for a second, with the same cold, pale, diseased purple light of the machine far below. He returned to his work,